Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. I would love to be with you in Norway at this time of the year. We can't, but at least you can come to Portugal remotely with 32 degrees out there in a sunny day. Okay, so my name is Guilherme Ferreira. I'm Portuguese. My name is probably a bit hard if you don't speak Portuguese. But if you want to speak with me, just try it. Give your best. I don't know if I will be able to say your name also. So why I'm here to speak about simplicity? It's all because of my personal story that starts 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with a disease with a strange name. The name is ankylosing spondylitis, and it's quite rare disease. In the moment that I was diagnosed, I started panicking, obviously, because the name was so strange. And I have done that thing that you shouldn't do when someone tell you that you have a disease. I went to Google searching for what it is, this disease, and the results were quite frightening. But after a while, and after calm down, I start trying to learn how to cope with this. And I discover a lot of stories of people living with this disease and having a good life, a normal life. And during this time, I have been trying to follow a kind of scientific approach, trying to follow the scientific method, applying different things to my life. So I have been searching for things, for small experiments to do with my life that can help me. Obviously, there's no Stack Overflow for these kind of things. I would love to copy paste a solution for myself. But as an engineer, we can learn with others as we do when we are writing code. And during this time, I have been learning so many things that I have been changing and having results. Things like starting to meditate, things like changing my diet, things like changing the kind of sport that I was used to do. And all of those things had a good result on myself. And I was finding myself with less pain. The main reason why I was diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis was because I have a continuous back pain that I was ignoring for years. And after trying to do that, I start living with the disease really well. I could ignore meds, for example, and keep living without a lot of crisis. But the reality is that once in a while, the pain was coming and really hard. And most of those times was related to things like stress and anxiety. When I was feeling really stressful and anxious, I was starting to feeling really strange. My body was start to panicking. And that moment when I realized that most of those crises were related to stress was the moment when I was reading, by coincidence, the book *Sapiens*. The *Sapiens* is basically a book that tells us the story of the humankind, the human species, for 70,000 years. And on that book was quite clear to me the power of technology. And as a person that works with technology and loves technology, I was seeing the impact that we as an industry can have in the world. Let's see it. We as a species, we evolve and we survive and we simplify our lives through technology. Things like discovering the fire, inventing tools, learning how to farm, inventing a coin, learning how to sail, going to the moon. And we can even use our technology to do things that don't bring a lot of value. Things like just because you are a billionaire, you want to send a Tesla to the outer space. But the technology has this power, but it also implies a lot of complexity, and especially for those that are in our field. And after realizing that, I noticed that I'm no different than anyone. I have a disease that acts as a kind of a warning sign, but you probably feel things like burnout, things like really hard stress, things like depression. And on those cases, I'm in an advantage because I have a warning sign. You can try to cope with those things and leave it too far till a moment that it's really difficult to recover. And after all of this experience, I try to change a few things on my life that I believe that I can share with others and probably can be useful to you. So, as I was saying, we have used as a species the technology to simplify our lives. But we know that sometimes we try to make things more complicated than they are. If you have worked with those things that we call legacy systems, you know that when you have something really complex, it's really difficult to change. So complexity implies difficulty to change, implies too much effort, implies wasting time, wasting money, wasting talent, wasting your creativity to do different things. And that will lead you to low quality because, let's face it, things that are complex are quite difficult to keep it with a good quality. And usually you don't have a quality life when you need to work with complexity every single day. And that will cause you, as was causing me, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. And on my case was manifesting in pain. Obviously, I could handle it, but I tried to realize why. And I think that most of those stress on those moments is because of the demand that we are doing in our brain, the stress that we are putting in our brain. Those things that are complex tend to imply a high cognitive load. Your brain needs to process a lot of things to take decisions, for example. And besides that, there's the part that we will tend to go to procrastination. Okay, you will find yourself multiple times going to a news feed, going to places like Twitter, Instagram, whatever, and you will be there just trying to fulfill anything to don't do that task. And for example, a personal story. In the beginning of the pandemic, I was finding myself multiple times a day coming back to the same portal to see the numbers of the infections for Portugal, even after I knew that the numbers for that day here in Portugal were released only once. That was because of anxiety. And if I ask everyone, what is your favorite thing to do in your life? I bet that in your top 3 things, it's not scrolling in the feed. Usually it's other kind of things. So why do we bring complexity to our life? That brings us to these moments, okay, when you feel stressful and you don't want to do those kind of things. And this sometimes happens because you choose things to your life that don't help, that they are basically not helping, don't fulfilling the main job, or they have a special reason behind. But there are other moments where we, as an engineers, we tend to bring that complexity to the table. We are the responsible people for that. And that can happen by accident because no one wants to have a difficult life. I don't want it. But it starts emerging from the different cycles of, for example, a project. You see that when requirements start changing, when, for example, deadlines start arising, you will see that everything will start being more complex. And if you start cutting corners or assuming technical debt, is complexity that you are buying to the future. So we as an engineers, we are not also responsible only for those cutting corners. We are also responsible for bringing complexity because of our own fault. We even have a term for that. Over-engineering is that. When you focus so much in one thing that it's not the most important thing, but you work on that as if it was. For example, Apple, that is a brand that it's well recognizable. There's a sense of quality, a sense of simplification, a sense of customer care. They managed to create a mouse that you can't use while it's charging. To me, this is over-engineering because someone, a team, has been so focused on creating a beautiful piece of art that they forget that that thing was a mouse. So this is a sign that we sometimes tend to ignore what is really important. And I was really specialist doing that, don't questioning what should I be doing. Other thing that I was really good bringing complexity to my life was after conferences like this one. For example, going to a conference and getting back to the office and being really excited because of a new technology. I saw WebAssembly, I saw Blazor, I saw whatever. And I will try to find a problem to fit my solution and not the other way around. That is completely wrong, because I was bringing complexity to me, and I bet that 3-4 years after I would be in the same conference, and the trendy thing would be other. So I will regret from the choosing the other one in the past. Why keep doing that? Other case that I'm really good doing that is trying to predict the future. And I'm not that good predicting the future. I'm good trying, because I want to sometimes to try to understand what will happen. But for example, every single plan that I have made for 2020 is now completely screwed. Probably yours too. And probably from every single company, they are screwed, or they shift in some way, because you can't predict what will happen in a near future, or even in a longer future. So those cases where you start a project and you are so excited because you will start using some modern technology, you will use microservices, Kubernetes, because you want to work with 1 billion users. But the reality is that sometimes you will work on that project, and after 1 year, you keep having 20 to 30 people using. So you have brought the complexity to your life, because when you need to do a small bug fix, a small new feature, it will take so much time. It will demand so much from you just because of a decision of the past. And are those things that I have been identifying as the causes related to technology that I was bringing stress to my own life. And as the opposite thing from complexity is simplicity. And it happens that I'm involved on the idea of minimalism and those kind of things. I tried to find a few examples of good brands, good examples of what simplicity should be. Because I believe that simplicity was the response to control all of this complexity that I already have in my life from leaking and keep growing. And one good example is Apple. Is a brand that at least I recognize, and most of the people recognize, as you thinking about the customer, concerned about the perfection, the balance, everything. At least the Apple from the days of Steve Jobs was that. And by the way, I'm not sponsored by Apple. If you work for Apple, just call me. And well, Apple is one of those examples, but you know other ones, things like Lego. Lego is incredible. It's so simple, but you combine with your creativity and you can create so cool stuffs. And it's a simple plastic brick that was used so many years ago. Kids today keep using it, and grown-ups keep using it. And the reality is that we as an industry, we keep using Lego as a metaphor for most of the things that we do. It's the power of the concept. Other good example is the Unix philosophy. Unix says one thing, do one thing and do it well. It's all about simplicity. So as you can see, simplicity is around us. And why it's so important to me? Because when you look to something simple, it transmits to you a sense of quality, a sense of, it's like shining everything. Everything seems so much better when something is simple, when you don't need to have a high cognitive load to use that thing. And we can do a small exercise. For example, picture yourself buying a car, okay? And we are going to buy a luxury car. Choose your brand. I will go with Jaguar. And what will happen is that you will go to a building and you will see a huge building. You go inside and you will see only 1 to 2 cars and a lot of empty space. And you give that thing gives you a sense of trust, quality. They really believe on that car. They are just focused on sending you that car. On the other way around, if you go to buy a really cheap car, used car, you go to a car shop, a car dealer, and you will see a lot of cars packed in a small space. And you try to open the door of one car, and it's even really tight that you can't look inside. And you don't feel comfortable on those scenarios. Why? Because 70,000 years ago, when we were basically recollectors, if we were in the middle of a jungle, we will be really afraid of a scary animal jumping through and attacking us. And those things are in our brain. That's why when you go to a shopping mall and you look to the stores, you see the difference of the store from the outside. And you can almost infer the pricing basically from the number of items that you see exposed. That's because we tend to like empty space. We tend to appreciate. It's like breathing. Breathing is really important, as we were discussing in the Slack room in the beginning. So other good thing that I really like from simplicity is the idea of trust. Something that is really simple is something that is trustworthy. For example, imagine that you need to subscribe a new insurance. If you don't understand anything about insurance, like myself, you will be a bit afraid to take a decision. You will not be that confident, okay? Because isn't your language, there's a lot of conditions, you don't know what to compare, and you probably will go with the cheaper price, the brand that you recognize as trustworthy, but you are not that confident. But if you go to eat a burger and you go to a burger shop and there's only 3 options and you know that what you like, okay, it's quite simple. You just need to decide between 3. It's the paradox of choice. Too many choices is too complex for us. And all of these values, all of these qualities were something that I believe that I could control the mess that was around me, that was causing me a lot of pain, at least reduce the number of times that I was feeling so bad. And all of that with one goal in mind, the goal of being more present and more aware of the things, having a different feeling according to my own life. Because one of the worst things, for example, if you have kids, is to getting back home after a day of work and playing with your kids and having a kind of a background thread, always trying to solve the problem from the day, and you are not present on that moment, and that counts a lot when you start questioning yourself, what do you really like to do? So being aware of that simplicity was probably the solution. Remember, I always try to do small experiments and measure the impact. I try to understand what can I do to apply simplicity and how far should I go? Because I was afraid that trying to convince everyone that simplicity was a good thing to seem a crazy guy. And the reality is that simplicity has limits also, because you don't want everything to be so simple that it seems lazy. Because the simplicity depends on the context. If you are designing a system for doctors, you will see that you need to have a given context. A doctor should think that system is simple. I don't need to use that system. It's not for me. It should be in the language of other person. For example, if you are creating a nuclear launch attack system, you need to ensure that it's not that easy as YouTube for Kids. And we are used to do that for example, if we implement user interfaces, we tend to apply some barriers to things like removing data, those kind of things. So everything should be simple as possible. And you need to be aware of that limit and force yourself to find it. Other thing that I was afraid was to be perceived as lazy, because or having people demanding me to do the things twice as fast because was the simplest version. But the reality is that simplicity can be really difficult to achieve. Simplicity is something that you need to fight for. You need to be really creative because you need to manage the complexity from growing. And one day it will pay off, but it's easier to be lazy and go through complexity. So being aware of that is really important. And obviously, you can't do anything, as I can't do anything without having the people working with me, the people in my life, following the same principles. Doesn't mean that everyone should be thinking like me, but at least everyone should believe that this is important. And the best tool that I've found to convince everyone that this is really important for us is the Agile Manifest. If you work in a team, probably you are doing Scrum or other kind of Agile methodology. And if you go to the Agile Manifest, you will see the 10th principle. And it's all about simplicity. I really like this principle because you can read it as a good summary of a lot of things that we talk about Agile and DevOps and all of those things. Things like failing fast, for example, it's beyond this, because the idea of this principle is that you shouldn't do a single line of code that one day won't be needed. Doesn't mean that you will be able to do that, but in the perfect world, it's that. And that means that you need to have really quick iterations. You need to be really quick to having feedback. You shouldn't write a line of code before at least validate the concept, for example, validate the contract, the interface, those kinds of things. But there's another tool that I really like to use that can really help doing that. That is the tool of organizing pre-mortem meetings. What is a pre-mortem meeting? Basically, it's a session where you bring everyone into a room, nowadays into a call, and you ask to the team a challenge. The challenge is, let's stop thinking in a constructive way. Let's try to destroy a given idea, a given project, a given solution. And when you challenge everyone to do that, and by the way, you need to create a culture where it's really safe to fail. It's really safe to assume that, okay, it's normal to fail. We prefer to fail in this phase than in production, for example. And by doing this, you will challenge everyone to attack that idea. And you will have at least one of three outcomes. One, you have a perfect solution, okay? Happy. You have a solution that has room for improvement. There are a few scenarios that no one thought about and you need to address them. Awesome. It's perfect. I prefer to have them on that moment than in the future, where the cost of the complexity to change is quite high. And the other one is to, the last option is that you can abort it. Doesn't matter. Google as a company, I think the name is the X company or X project, where they try to kill every single project. Is their main mission, because it can be too expensive to kill something after a few years. And remember, what I want is to remove complexity. It's not because I want to be lazy. It's because I want to do what really matters. I want to use my time wisely. If I have multiple options to go, multiple solutions, that sometimes you can be challenged with that because the team can come up with multiple solutions. One principle that I tend to use is a philosophical principle of the Occam's razor. The Occam's razor is basically a principle that says to you that usually the simplest path is the best path. Simplest option is the best option. And that is really interesting to me, because if you combine this with the idea of failing really fast, you will see that it's the perfect fit. Because usually achieving something that you figure out that is simple, it's quite easy when compared to something that seems quite complex, that there are a lot of hidden things. You are afraid then that you will go through months and in the last week you will find a roadblock really severe. So going first with the simplest thing usually simplify your life, because you can find this solution, the correct solution with the simplest idea, or you can at least try it and prevent yourself from frustration and those kind of things. Other tool that I tend to use, because of the idea of minimalism and those kind of things, we tend to question the value that anything brings to your own life. And when you do that and you apply that to things that you are asked to do, you will see that you can discard so many things. At least you can challenge the other person to think about it, because sometimes we just do because the customer has to do. That no one knew that there was a better way, for example. So these principles that you see online so many times, things like keep it simple, less is more, are all about this, are all about questioning the value of things. And when you start questioning the value, a lot of times you will need to learn how to say no, because you will not believe that you should do that, and you should fight for it. Okay, you should give the chance to the other person to convince you that you should be doing that. I was finding myself so many times in situations that I didn't like or that I didn't believe, just fighting for an idea from other person, or just being in a moment because I didn't want to be unpolite. And this is one of the things that I keep having trouble to do in my day to day, probably because of a cultural thing. It's quite difficult to say no. But when you start doing that in your personal life, in your professional life, you will see that you will not get into so many problems. Things like saying, no, I don't know. It's so important. Saying things like, no, I don't believe on that deadline. It's important to say that. You are giving the chance to the other person to bring you to their side, at least. Now I would love to do a small exercise with you, and you will be asked in the beginning of the video to do a simple task, and I would love to see in the chat by the end the kind of response that you have, if you have the correct one or not.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
If you saw the moonwalking bear, please write in the Slack. This was so me. I was finding myself so many times so focused on one thing, one task, that I completely ignored everything around. And I was getting into trouble because of myself, because of being so focused. And we are really good focusing, because if you close your fist in front of you and you just focus on your fist, you will see that everything around will blur. That's why we are really specialists doing that. And when we are writing code, for example, we are really good doing that. So what we need to do is the idea of seeing the forest, not the trees. And how can we do that? Simple tricks. Take a walk. It's so important. How many times I have been in there, and I bet that you have been there also, of being during a complete day, trying to fix something, finding a solution to something, and fighting, being frustrated, being stressed, going back home, and in the other day, get back in the morning, and in 10 minutes I had the solution. That's quite common, and was the power of abstracting myself that solved that. The other situation that you can do is basically talk to someone, talk to a colleague, do a small call, talk to your partner, talk to your dog, doesn't matter. The simple fact of trying to express your ideas and try to explain will make you reach a solution sometimes, because you organize the information in a different way that can prevent you to go to the complex solution. And that is really important. Well, but there are other moments when I was feeling frustrated and kind of don't believing on myself, and that leads you to stress. Those moments were especially when, do you know when you are challenged to think outside of the box? I hate that expression. I really hate it. Because to me, it's completely wrong. Let's face it, writers, a book writer is really creative. At least to me, it's really creative. Creating a book with 200 pages telling a story, it's creativity. But they suffer from a syndrome of the blank page. And when a writer suffers from that syndrome and you talk with an experienced writer, you will see that the best tool that they have to overcome those kind of problems usually is just start writing. Why? Because when you start writing, you will basically create your one constraint. Your first line is the constraint for the rest of the story. Doesn't mean that you can go back to rewrite that sentence. Obviously you can, but you just need to put your brain in motion. Why are we so many times afraid of finding the constraints? Everything has constraints. Constraints of time, constraints of money, constraints of technology, constraints of people, wherever. Everything has a constraint. And a good example that I like to use to bring people to my side, to find the borders of the box and thinking inside of the box, is the example of the Lego Kronkiwongi. What is Lego Kronkiwongi? A few years ago, the marketing team of Lego, in a given meeting, was challenged by the team manager to empty their pockets. When they empty their pockets, they sum all the money that was on the table. And they have around 100 heroes. I think that is about 1,000 Norwegian crowns. And let's face it, 100 heroes to create a marketing campaign for Lego doesn't seem enough. At least globally, it doesn't seem enough. So they needed to be really creative. So what they have done, they came up with a word that doesn't exist, is Kronkiwongi, and they challenge every single parent and kids on their social networks to build a Kronkiwongi and share them back. The best Kronkiwongi would win the prize. When you challenge a small kid to build something that doesn't exist or to draw something that doesn't exist, they don't care. They invent something. That's why they don't have those limits. And this is the idea that with a small thing, you can create amazing things. When you know that your constraint was so less money, than you are used to, you need to be really creative. So use this example to find your constraints. Other moment of stress to me and related to the things that I do was when I was facing a problem or trying to find a solution for a new feature, whatever, and I'm fighting against it for a lot of days. And when you are on those moments, you start thinking that you are not capable, that you are not good enough, those kind of things. And that is frustrating. What I learned to do was based on this story, and it's the story of the Houston airport. By the way, I think that isn't the Houston airport, but it's an airplane. The story is that years ago, the Houston airport used to have a lot of complaints related to the time that the luggage take to arrive to the place where you collect it. And what they have done was to try to measure the average time that someone took to come from the arrivals part of the airport to that place. And usually it was about 1 minute. One thing that they knew is that they could improve the time that the luggage took to come to that place, but they couldn't overcome the time from the person. Was just 1 minute. What they have done, because they didn't have a solution, was to change the problem. They basically moved the arrivals part of the airport to a distant location. With that, now you need to walk through all the airport to go to collect your luggage. And this seems not a good idea, but the reality is that it is, because when you are walking, you feel that this is productive time. When you are stopped, just waiting for your luggage, you are bored. So they created a good solution and they reduced the number of claims. So what I try to do nowadays is when I face one of those problems, I try to find, when I'm really locked, I try to find a different thing that I can do that this given problem now is part of the solution and isn't perceived as a problem. And a lot of times you can do that. You can do that sometimes with just a bit of documentation. Just try to use those real life examples to find sometimes a simplest way to escape from really complex problems. And as we work on technology, we know that sometimes the problems are not about thinking, are not about creativity, are not about those kind of things that I have been telling you. A lot of times we have really bad reactions to bad code, to bad implementation. We are those kind of people. And I have a few tricks that I have been doing and really help me to cope with the stress and prevent that stress. One of them is the way that I approach new designs, new features, new things that I need to implement. I was used to start by drawing from the inside to the outside, following a kind of DDD practice where you design your domain model, and when you are okay with it, you start building the system around. Recently, I started doing a different kind of thing. Now I try to be so focused on the customer and ignore that it's me that will be implementing that feature. I try to come up with the best contract, the best user interface, the best API endpoint that I can have to my user use. Because by preventing complexity on his side, I am preventing complexity from emerging in 1 year or two when I need to review all my user interface because the users can't use that feature. So that will make you to shift the complexity to the inside of the application. So always try to start by designing your contract first with your customer in mind and test the idea with your customer before implementing it. It's the best way of failing fast. What you can do when you push the complexity to the inside is that you will get all that complexity to manage. But we have tools to work with that. Let's face it, you don't need to know how a car engine works to drive a car. You don't need to know how Google implemented a search engine to use Google. My parents don't understand nothing about that, and they can use it. So we can do the same things in our systems. We can start creating abstractions from the complexity. And when you create abstractions, you start thinking in small things, like Unix. Do one thing and do it well. Then it comes to play Lego, just composition. Try to follow this to have your brain focused on a small thing at a time. That way, you will live with fewer complexity problems. It will seem so simple on that moment. Other tool that it's really important to me, and I tend to try to be an evangelist to everyone to come them to my side, is the importance of learning patterns and anti-patterns. Because when you know patterns and anti-patterns, you are basically knowing history. And by knowing history, you are preventing yourself from taking wrong decisions. For example, you know that someone in the past have done that thing and it didn't pay that well. For example, it can prevent you from doing something that works. It seems a good idea, but you are not seeing the full picture. And one day will be a problem. One day will be complexity. One day it might be pain. So knowing a few patterns and anti-patterns is really important. Other important thing to me, at least, clean code. Principles of clean code are a really important tool that I don't understand how so many people have so many years of experience and don't try to know more about this. I don't understand why we are not taught about this when you start learning programming. Because we spend so much time reading code. One line of code will be read so many times and probably only written once. Why don't we put the effort to reduce the cognitive load to maintain that line, to read that line? And you can do that with simple things. There's a lot of them online that you can search, but there are so many basic things that you can do. Things like naming. I can't understand how people keep giving abbreviations or being afraid of have long names on variables or methods just because they don't have to put the effort. Don't be afraid of having a long name. Your compiler doesn't care, but you will care, your future self will care, your colleagues will care. So put the effort of having really good names that describe what it's doing, and combine that with things like extracting logic to the outside. If you extract something to the outside and you give it a proper name, you will see that now it's more expressive. We are writing code to be read. It's like we are writing code related sometimes to user stories. It's a story. You are writing a story. So try to have English or your own language. Try to express what you are doing. By that way, you reduce the high cognitive load required to understand that function, for example. Other one, this one to me is quite curious because I was taught to program that when I was taught to program, someone told me that you should always only return once. Now I believe that I should return early and I should return as many times as I need because I'm preventing the code from getting messy, of having a lot of nesting, those kind of things. So there are a lot of small things related to clean code that you can learn, and you should be enforcing your team, your colleagues to evolve to that place because it's taking care of your future self. Other thing that I've learned to do and has been helping me to remove some of the stress in a few moments is to start writing more things. It's curious because I really like when I'm using a library or a framework and the documentation is really good. I like to, when I'm recommending something to someone, to say, oh, I really like this technology. Every time that I need to do something, I have an example in the documentation. So why do you like documentation and we don't like to write it? And sometimes it's really easy to write documentation. Sometimes it's just a few bullet points. So what I invite you to do when I start doing that with good results is to create a kind of a second brain. Because when you move those things outside of your brain, you start gaining space to other things. And one day when someone needs you to explain something, you don't need to take the time to remember again everything after 1 year. You can just say, oh, there's a link here. It's so much easier. And one small thing that you can do, this problem I see it a lot, is if you have, for example, a team where sometimes someone new comes to the team and it's always a challenge to put their development machine working, I invite you to just, next time, just write a few bullet points of the requirements needed, okay? What versions of software you need. By doing that, you are preventing yourself from taking the effort in the future. Other important thing is to put automated tools working for you. One example, editor configs, linters, those kind of things will remove you so much stress. I was finding myself on the code reviews trying to find problems with casing. Doesn't make sense. I should be trying to find problems with the code, not the casing. If you have that code in your source control, please remove it. It's not doing anything there, okay? If someone tell you this is here because one day might be needed, you have a bigger problem. You don't have source control, and that's a bigger problem. Use source control to get back to the past, to recover something. Don't leave that code comment, and it's noise. It doesn't help you. And related to comments, don't comment what your code is doing, because if you are doing that, it means that you don't have clean code. Your code isn't expressive enough. What you should be doing is to comment things like the why. When you look to a piece of code and you can't understand why someone has done this, it's useful to have a comment. One good example, when I tend to use comments, is, for example, if I'm relying on a given framework and that framework has a given bug that I need to do some strange thing to work through it, waiting for a next version, the bug being released, I just leave a comment saying I'm doing this because of this bug with the link to GitHub, for example. those kind of comments are useful. Comments like in a function, get customer, saying gets a customer doesn't help. Obviously, you can't simplify things without removing things from your life. That's the idea, for example, from minimalism, removing things from your life, things that don't bring value. And what you can do in products, in software projects, is try to find those things that don't bring value. Sometimes you will not be able to remove anything because people are using every single thing. But at least trying to find things that can be deprecated and those kind of things. A lot of times you have built in the past one feature that today isn't needed. But if you can't remove anything, at least try to consolidate. Try to find a way to package that thing in a different way that can be reused. Try to find duplicated code. Try to find interfaces that can be merged. For example, there's a lot of things that can be done to reduce the surface of code that you need to manage, because less things tend to be fewer things to bring complexity to our life. So trying to wrap up and coming to an end, I have been seeing in my life that I was in a constant growth of complexity in my personal and in my professional life. And a lot of times I wasn't doing anything to fight for it. I was trying to do my best, but I wasn't even aware of those moments. And the simple fact of being aware that complexity is arising and that simplicity is important will make you question things. The simple act of questioning the value of things will help you to reduce that complexity. Obviously, will not be easy to start bending the curve down. But there are a few things that you can do. For example, do like Marie Kondo. Question the value of the things. For example, I have a principle. If you have one feature in your software that usually has a lot of problems, no one likes to touch it, is something that you don't like the end result, try to convince everyone that it will pay off to take a time to review it. By doing that, you are basically reducing the complexity. Those kind of actions tend to be ignored a lot of times with just thinking moving forward, but giving a step back and rewriting things sometimes is more important than adding a new feature. Other important message to me is that we should stop thinking as programmers and start thinking like writers. A writer tends to create something that he wants to be really beautiful and will project an image from himself for the future. It's like all of his books are important. They tell a story. They don't want to have a bad book. They know that in the future, the future books may be best than the previous ones, but it's something that it will stay forever. We tend to create code just for that moment. We tend to create code just to run and to fulfill a requirement. And that, to me, it's completely wrong. We should write code thinking that our first customer, it's the guy next to us. It's our team. It's the people that will start reviewing your code. Those are your first customers. And in 5 years, when you are not on that company working on that project, someone will read your code and will create an image from yourself. They will see in the source control that you were the author and you want to have a good image. So thinking as a writer is really important, telling stories with code. Last but not least, respect time. Respect your time and respect the time of the others. As Kate told us today in the keynote, 5 minutes in a weekday isn't 5 minutes when you are at home with your family. They don't have the same value. They are 5 minutes, but they are not the same. And we are living strange times where people are realizing that were using time in things that they don't appreciate. And they will start questioning those things. And I believe that we have the responsibility to gain time for ourselves, to prevent ourselves from using time that we value in things that are not that important as those things, those special minutes. And we also have a responsibility to reduce the time that the people that are using our software will invest on that software. If you remove 1 minute from a task that is performed once a month, is 1 minute of other things that you can give to that person. So always put time in perspective. Okay, respect doing your best, trying to remove the cognitive load. So there are 2 sentences that I think that can recap the importance of simplicity to me. One of them is that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, from Leonardo da Vinci, the idea of balance, care, crafting, perfection, all of those kind of things. And the other one is that simplicity is not easy, but is possible and can change your life. Thank you. If you have questions, now I will look into Slack and I can answer them. Thank you all.